A quick caveat about fundraising videos. I know they can be a little scary or maybe annoying. Maybe you feel pressured or guilt-driven to give. You don't need to feel that at all. Just you being here means that there is ad revenue that I will then give. So in that way, you are still supporting what we're talking about today. If you can give, please do. What this is a new project for Mindshift. This is going to be the fundraising side of the channel. I'm going to call it Giving Beyond Belief, a fun little play on words there. And it's just an opportunity for people in the secular environment to put our money where our mouth is. Once a month, that's what I'm going to do on this channel. We're going to highlight an issue within religion, or a real issue in the world that religion claims to have a solve for, or an excuse for, and we're going to look at those solves. We're going to look at the biblical case for it, and then I'm going to introduce a real world practical way to address the issue in the form of a charity. And so again, this is Giving Beyond Belief, just what it sounds like. You don't have to be in religion. If you have left, if you have deconverted, you might still want to do something like tithing, but have it go further, be more effective, help and reach more people. And so once a month, I'm going to give you the option and availability to do so. So thank you again just for being here. Let's get started by going over last month's Giving Beyond Belief, which was episode 1 on childhood cancer, where we raised money for St. Jude. As of this morning, December 16th, we have raised $3,720 through the donate button that you'll see off to the right side of this video. That's unbelievable. I was going to be very content if we had raised $1,000. And then also, additionally, and less exciting, I agreed that any ad revenue that came in during this first month, I would donate as well. And again, as of this morning, that is $150. Now, my hope is that in the future, these videos do much better. We get a ton of views. People are sharing this knowing that I'm going to be donating the ad revenue. So just to help out with this first one, I'm doubling what is here, and so I donated $300 towards St. Jude as well. Here's the receipt for that. You can also see that the count up on the page is up to over $4,000. I'm not bragging here. I just think it's important to show that if I say I'm going to do something, you see me actually do that donation. And so again, $4,000 towards St. Jude for childhood cancer treatment and research, I think is unbelievable from our tiny little community here. Thank you, Mindshifters. But let's put the intro and last week aside, and let's talk about today's video. Our topic is starvation. Like the cancer video, we will look at the conditions that are going on this earth right now. We will talk about why ultimately a truly sovereign God needs to take responsibility for the horrors around this particular topic. We'll look at the biblical cases that show the issue. And then today specifically, we'll be talking about action against hunger, which from my research, I believe to be the best place to give money towards this particular cause. And so again, you should on the right side of your page see a donate button. If that's something you want to give to, please feel free to do so as the video progresses. So let's talk numbers. 9 million people worldwide each year die from hunger-related causes, 3.1 million of which are children. That means a child is starving to death every 10 seconds, or assuming this video will be about 20 minutes, that's 120 children that will die while you watch this video. Now, when I did the cancer video, many people talked about me being emotionally manipulative, or me utilizing the fallacy of the appeal to emotion. And what I'll say is quickly, if an argument has a fallacious setup, it doesn't mean the argument is wrong. That's always something that's important to understand when we talk about logical fallacies. But two, when you're talking about morality, when you're trying to show that there is indeed a problem that exists that requires attention and awareness that the current religious ideas about it are incorrect, you do need to cover the facts of the situation. The very fact that those facts make you uncomfortable, especially if you are a religious person, might be what is more telling here. A difficulty to reconcile the God that you have been told about, a God who is perfect and just and loving, who cares for all his creation, and then this state of the world. Then we can talk about free will and all of these things all day, but this is an excessive, unnecessary level of human suffering from one issue alone: hunger. A base need that this God created us with, to need to eat other living things, to take life essentially in one form or another just to survive. I've talked about this a few times, but he makes plants with this ability to photosynthesize, to just look up at truly what is their God, the sun, who actually gives them the energy needed to survive and thrive. But no, with us, his highest creation, created in his image, he makes us such fragile, broken things that require, again, the death of something living in order to feed our own continued existence. And then puts us in this world where so many people, billions of people over time that are supposedly his precious creation, that have met nothing but a horrific suffering end immediately, even as children, let alone the people that have to go through this as adults or watch their children go through this later in life. But again, just to meet this horrific end of suffering and agony that is starvation. It's not an appeal to emotion, it is a display of facts. The mid-range of how many people are affected by hunger is 735 million. So only 9 million people die, but the total story of suffering goes even so much further beyond them. Again, the parents witnessing, holding their child in their arms as they can do nothing. The aid that just couldn't get there, or there wasn't enough of it, or it wasn't allowed. The rationing that had to be done. The hard decisions that had to be made. The choices about who would live and who would die. The people that were forced to do things that you and I would never want to do or couldn't believe that we could do just to survive or help their family to do so. Hunger is a dire thing. And yet it is such a stark reality for so many people on this planet throughout history and unfortunately even now in modern times. Some other quick stats and we'll move on. But again, between 713 and 757 million people worldwide faced chronic hunger in 2023, an increase of approximately 152 million since 2019. The world may be getting smaller, we may be getting ever interconnected, but this problem is still expanding. Nearly 282 million people in 59 countries experience high levels of acute food insecurity in 2023. That means they required urgent assistance not to die. Bringing it back to God's home territory, in Gaza, as of June 2024, approximately 3,500 children under the age of 5 were at risk of death from starvation, with 8,000 diagnosed with malnutrition, just to hyperlocalize it, make it very specific to the recent time frame. As of 2024, there's an estimated 1.3 million people globally experiencing famine or famine-like conditions. Again, more specifically in South Africa, the 23-24 El Nino season induced drought that has led to the worst hunger crisis in decades, affecting over 27 million people. Even in the US, major droughts from 1980 to 2023 have caused economic losses totaling billions of dollars. This highlights the financial impact as well of these things. Hunger is a major issue in this world, the one world we have, and it always has been. And for a God who is remembered for a miracle of feeding the hungry, one of his greatest, feeding the 5,000, multiplying what resources were there so that everybody had not just enough, but more than enough. Again, a God who created everything and said that it was good, and a God that after the fall of 2 humans decided to curse mankind. One of them would be the curse of work that would lead to the epic fight that all humans since supposedly have known, the struggle to survive, the negotiation with resources to have enough. Make no doubt about it that from the beginning, curse number 1 has been to put man in a position of fragility, to remove comfort and stability from their life to the highest degree, being able to survive themselves and or take care of the ones that mean the most to them. And so how do Christians or any religion that makes these same omni claims look around at the state of the world, at the history that we know about, and think, yes, this is a good, true, and fair God? Well, there's a few ways that they do it. And we're going to talk about those excuses in a second. But first, I want to give you some biblical evidence for who this God really is in connection to this issue. Duke 28:48, therefore in hunger and in thirst, in nakedness and dire poverty, you will serve the enemies the Lord sends against you. He will put an iron yoke on your neck until he has destroyed you. So I'm starting with this one because God is taking credit for creating these conditions. This is his just punishment. And the problem with trying to do quick, succinct videos where we introduce a biblical issue and then we give a charity to help with the solution is that it could branch into so many different things. We could talk about what it means for a God to punish in this way. We could talk about collective punishment, which is what this is, which is the opposite of an eye for an eye that is also toted around in the Old Testament, which is more personal responsibility based. When children are starving to death because the Lord has caused a famine or a drought or has helped an enemy army lay a proper siege. There's major questions about God's justice and fairness there, or the women or the innocent men. It's just very small thinking to think of a group as good and a different group as evil. One group worth protecting, the other needing to be punished. All of these from a supernatural source. This isn't natural consequences, which so many people like to point out when we talk about generational sin or collective punishment. No, God in many of these stories intervenes at a very high supernatural level to protect or to punish. It's not natural, but let's read some more examples. Amos 4:6-7, I gave you empty stomachs in every city and lack of bread in every town, yet you have not returned to me. I also withheld rain from you when the harvest was still 3 months away. I sent rain on one town, but withheld it from another. What do we learn here about God? We learn that he uses hunger and thirst to try to get people to come to him. He was surprised when he held out on them, and yet they were still not scrambling back to him in their dire circumstance. He wants credit for being the entity that withholds. He gave the empty stomach. He caused the rain to cease. So many excuses that the nature of this God is not one to harm, that he is there with these parents and these children who are suffering in this, that this is a cause of the fall, man's free will. But many times we see that's just not the case from God. Ezekiel 5:16-17, when I shoot at you with my deadly and destructive arrows of famine, I will send to destroy you. I will bring more and more famine upon you and cut off your supply of food. I will send famines and wild beasts against you, and they will leave you childless. Plague and bloodshed will sweep through you, and I will bring the sword against you. I, the Lord, have spoken. Again, we're just setting up, giving God his credit here. 2 Samuel 21:1, during the reign of David, there was a famine of 3 successive years. So David sought the face of the Lord. The Lord said, it is on account of Saul and his blood-stained house. It is because he put the Gibeonites to death. So here we see again God holding on to a grudge, a 3-year drought because of one man's sin that is affecting an entire country. I'll point out every once in a while on a Tuesday Takedown some of these more wild preachers here in the U.S. preaching about how this country will be judged for the output of sin we have here is so much greater. And the more progressive Christians or some of even the more traditional Christians will message and say, that's not fair. Look at you picking people like that. That doesn't represent all of Christianity. No, it doesn't represent all of Christianity because none of you can agree with each other, but it 100% represents the God of this Bible, a God that who, when he saw cities or nations or tribes that were sinning, he used disease, he used natural phenomenon, and he used hunger as punishments, as tools. He interfered supernaturally to do so. But we'll talk about that a bit more when we get into the Christian excuses. A few more verses then. In Leviticus 26:19-20, I will break your stubborn pride and make the sky above you like iron and the ground beneath you like bronze. Your strength will be spent in vain because your soil will not yield its crops, nor will the trees of your land yield their fruit. Jeremiah 14:12, although they fast, I will not listen to their cry. Although they offer burnt offerings and grain offerings, I will not accept them. Instead, I will destroy them with the sword, famine, and plague. So much for God that always forgives, that always hears, that roots for you, that wants the best for you, that has a plan to prosper you. No, you can be on your knees, repenting and begging for forgiveness, but if this God has already made up his mind that he wants to harm you, he will send the famine. This is his MO. We are reading about his nature. New covenant or not, it does not change who this God supposedly is and always will be on account of his immutability. On and on. 2 Kings, Hosea, Zechariah, it's just famine after famine after famine as punishment for punishment for punishment. Can't not quote Isaiah 45:7, I form the light and create darkness. I bring prosperity and create evil or disaster or calamity, whatever you want. But I, God, do all these things. Amos 3:6, when disaster comes to a city, has not the Lord caused it? And we'll jump to the very end for the last verse here, Revelation 6:8. I looked, and there before me was a pale horse. Its rider was named Death, and Hades was following close behind him. They were given power over 1/4 of the earth to kill by sword, famine, and plague, and by wild beast of the earth. So in the end times, at least 25%, one of the options for them will be famine. You know who is the only one that can open the seal to begin all of these acts? Jesus Christ, your new covenant scapegoat. In the past and in the future, we are supposed to believe that this God will purpose purposely use famine as punishment. Yet in the present, when we see famine, many Christians' first excuse, and that's what we're moving on to, is this is a natural consequence. We live in a fallen world. We live with free will. Those are really three different excuses, but all in one they mean, my God's not responsible. So he used to be, and you believe he will be again, but he's what, taking a time out from this kind of action because he's so inconsistent? Or because it fits your narrative better that at the time you live, you worship a loving God who just wants to be your best friend and offer you salvation and knock on your heart and whisper in your ear. And instead of being redundant, because I handled this in my reaction to the cancer video, go to that video, go to like the minute 11 mark and play from there. Listen to the verses where God takes 100% credit for anything and everything that happens, including the bad, the evil, and the things that cause suffering. Your God wants the credit. Just give it to him. Stop making these ridiculous excuses. Free will was part of that. If there's free will, where's the free will for the 1-year-old that is starving to death on their mother's breast who is also starving to death? What did either of them do? Well, it's not their free will, it's the free will of man in general that brought sin into the world, and that's going to bring in disease and inequality, and you just don't understand how it works. No, I understand. You're just unwilling to connect the final dot. Who caused that curse to go into effect? Who is holding the power of that curse? Who is enforcing it? Who's ensuring it? Who declared it? God. Even though he knew what would happen. You will never get away from this issue. As long as you want this tri-omni God, you cannot have it always. You have to come to grips with this as a Christian. And many of you Christians have. That would be the next kind of group. Hey, it's not fair, but God never promised it would be fair. And who are you to judge God? God will make it right in the end. And one of the things I've noticed more lately, because it's come up so much, is this excuse of sovereignty is always coupled with, I think, the necessary couching for the believer to say, there will be justice in the end, though. And this is so short-sighted to me, to think that just because there's some concept of unproven eternal paradise, that gives God the right to do whatever he wants now. That gives God the right to make us suffer through this. If we took more time here, we could talk about the why not heaven now argument. And the short version is this. If we have this very short time frame in comparison to infinity, 70, 80, 90 years on earth, as some kind of a testing ground where we either accept Jesus or we don't, where we determine our eternity, which is either heaven or hell or annihilation maybe. And if God is omniscient, so he already knows what's going to happen, why not skip earth? Why not heaven now? And just take the people that would have made the cut and move them straight to heaven. And you get into arguments about, oh, well, they wouldn't be able to appreciate heaven without first experiencing all the pain on earth, which is ridiculous. Does that mean God isn't happy then because he's never been a non-perfect being? God himself, not Jesus, has never even been tempted by evil. So how can he appreciate the good? Seems like he found a way to. If we're really made in his image, why would we need to go through this? It makes no sense at all. And then what? We go through this and we get to heaven, and I lay out this argument in my heaven video or my conversation with Trent. But what? Now we are perfect? Why? What changed? Do we still have free will in heaven? If you say, yes, we have free will, but no one will ever sin again, then God is capable of creating a place with free will and no sin. So why didn't he just do that on the earth? And if you say there's no free will in heaven, then that makes the idea and excuse of a necessary time on earth of suffering as meaningless, as completely unnecessary. Either way, why not heaven now? And then you get to some weird answer of a justifiable level of necessary suffering to produce the perfect conditions for this life and the next. And to me, I think it's beyond easy to see that this is not a normal or necessary level of suffering. This isn't some bare minimum threshold requirement for us to be able to understand as a species the good because there's been some experience of the bad. The very fact that right now, bam, another child died of starvation, even though one did 10 seconds ago and one is about to in about 5 more seconds here, that's unnecessary. There's a mother somewhere in the world who is losing 2 children right now in the same hour, the same day, the same month, whatever you need it to be. Why not just lose one? That's not going to be a big enough of a wake-up call for her to turn to this God that, by the way, she very well has never even heard about. And she's well over the age of accountability, whatever that's going to be. So after both of her children die from starvation for supposedly some sin consequence that they couldn't have had, but there's some greater plan at heart here, maybe her turning to the Lord, and one child death wasn't going to do it. It was going to take two. But when she dies, never having even heard the name Jesus Christ, and therefore is burning in hell after the suffering of her two children that needlessly died, how are you going to tell me that was a necessary suffering for God's greater good? It can't be. And that's not me thinking small, which will be the next excuse, that God's ways are higher. We're not going to be able to understand all of this. He is a mystery. No, it's small thinking to continue to tell yourself in the face of real facts about real suffering with real numbers and real data about how much unnecessary suffering is going on this planet when you consider that there is supposedly an all-perfect God who is all-caring, all-beneficial, and all-loving, and all-powerful that could do something and doesn't. No, you don't get to say that that God is in control, that that God is good and loving, that that God is so mysterious and impressive and powerful that he's got something brewing that's going to make all of this make sense and justified. No. That's the small thinking. Me recognizing there cannot be a good personal God at play in this scenario, this level of suffering on this earth, in this reality, that's just accurate thinking. It's not egotistical. It's not assuming I could do better than God. It's not trying to bring God down to my human level of thinking. It's obvious to anyone not trying to make excuses for the thing they already believe and want to continue to justify. So sometimes the excuses themselves get in the way. I covered this in my Sunday video about the apathy of Christianity that I think is induced from this idea of how lowly and worthless and futile we are and this world is. That the only thing that matters is believing the right thing and dying so you can move on to the real life. Again, when that is your mindset, not only are you personally hurt, but you hurt those around you. Those were the studies we looked at, and it also causes inaction. Why should you care about the person on the other side of the world starving to death when your church is doing another fundraiser trying to get another $80,000 for the extra parking lot because they're starting to expand? There's a priority that gets put in front of you for where your giving should be going. Your tithes and offering, which even biblically was supposed to be for the poor and widowed, have somehow now gotten eaten up by the church and their agenda. It's corrupt. We're going to be doing another video on why churches shouldn't exist. And then when they do take your money to do good, they do less good with it than secular charities. And specifically, we have the numbers for this around Christian charities that fight hunger and secular charities that fight hunger. And this isn't the case for every category, but man, Christians do not do well with starvation giving. And I'll get to those numbers in just a second, but continuing in this line with the excuses, it's not only the inaction and apathy from Christians, but also if you really believe something is God's will, that he is the one handling this, again, that he is sovereign, that he has a plan, then you really also believe your prayers are enough. You might even start to really believe really horrific things like they really deserved it. What a sick thought from anyone, but especially people that are living in the top 1% of anybody who has ever lived, which that number is down to $32,000 a year. If you're making $32,000 a year or more, you are in the top 1% worldwide. And you might feel incredibly poor on that, but that's still the top 1%. That's how poor the rest of the world is. And so for you to be able to sit anywhere, and I'm part of this group, I'm not judging you for your situation, just your attitude, if this is indeed your attitude. If you can sit there with your $8 Starbucks, your $200 worth of clothes on, your $70 Bible because you wanted the fun study version with the special pretty case, gabbing away at your small group where you just dropped another $100 for some catering, and as you're all snacking and laughing in the comfortability of your very nice home, for you to have the audacity to say that the real people just like you, who have kids just like you, who care and love their family and friends just like you, who have dreams and aspirations, skills and talents, well, they're starving to death, living a nightmare. For some Christian in that situation to be like, yeah, they deserve it. This is God's punishment. He knows what he's doing. This is his wrath. Sorry. It's one of the most disgusting, hypocritical things I could possibly think of. And yet I know it happens. I've seen it happen. I've heard these conversations, and they may not be wicked and they may not be gleeful over the idea, but they sure had no problem washing their hands of it completely and just giving it to God. But if God's not real, or if he's real and just horrendous, like the verses I read, it's going to be on us. And so let's talk about where Christian charities fail, and then we'll talk about the charity I've chosen for today, and we'll wrap up. I have just a few points for you here. One is that a lot of religious aid comes with strings. An example of this, if you remember back to 2004, so many of the Christian organizations that helped out or gave to the Indian tsunami that happened were later criticized for giving preference and first treatment and help and aid to those willing to convert to Christianity. Survivors reported being forced to listen to sermons or accept Bibles in exchange for food. Now, you may think that's smart and killing two birds with one stone, but I think it's absolutely disgusting. What about people that were sincerely believing in their religion that didn't happen to be Christianity? Not just some atheist who didn't want to convert because of their life of sin, someone who really believed in their God the same way you really believe in your Christian God, and you're putting them in a position where essentially they have to denounce their faith to save their family. That is a sick and twisted situation to put someone in. And if that's God's love, well, actually it represents it pretty well. Love me or else you don't receive my good gifts. I guess Christians really are just acting like their father. But that's just an example. This is a very common practice within Christian charity. Also, there's a targeting here. We saw this in Uganda with some of the Christian charities giving, where they specifically were only going to groups that they felt they could reach and reach better. And then even within those groups, they were denying aid, specifically in this case, to some of the marginalized groups from the sexual identity side of things. I thought God loved everybody, but it makes sense that this bias that is built in from their religion about who is living a lifestyle of sin, who is an abomination and is not, might make a good line in the sand for who to waste your efforts on or not. And then there's just the inefficiency of Christian giving. There was a study done by Nonprofit Quarterly that found that religious institutions often allocate a significant percentage or portion of their budgets to religious activities instead of the actual aid that it's claiming. The stat is that on average, 30% of the funds collected for religious charity are spent on religious outreach, not aid. And according to Charity Watch, the average for secular charities allocates 85 to 90% of their givings. There's always going to be overhead. That's fine. Everybody understands that. But there is a huge difference between that 70% from the Christian organizations and the 85 to 90% for the secular. It shows where the overhead has to be, and then the excess that goes into the religious side. Tracts, pamphlets, Bibles, sermons, seminars, speakers. Samaritan's Purse is an organization that was putting so much money into Bibles and tracts, and it found that that was what they were giving out more than the actual aid, and they were doing it to people that were illiterate. This is the non-effective approach of many religious charities that just want to pass out those Bibles, reach the lost, not really caring about meeting their physical needs or even how effective they are being about their spiritual needs. When it comes to this topic, starvation, hunger specifically, Christian organizations are way behind. Despite claiming to be on the front lines of fighting hunger, religious charities only represent 15% of the total fight against hunger relief efforts, while secular organizations like the World Food Program or what we're talking about today, Action Against Hunger, dominate this area. And then there's the other bias where you're just even taking care of Christians first. Oxfam reported this with what was going on in South Sudan. Religious aid groups were prioritizing Christians over non-Christians, specifically in Muslim territories. And so to close out, that's why I'm pitching Action Against Hunger today. Unlike the religious charities, they are actually on the front lines. They are doing the most good. They operate on a principle of neutrality. They provide aid based off need alone. No other factors. Where is the need? And then they help. No other considerations. No strings attached. For every dollar donated, Action Against Hunger spends 93 cents directly on hunger relief programs. It is simply one of the most effective charities for this issue. And again, very transparent. We know that 93% because they've been getting 4 stars from Charity Navigator, which is a third-party charity audit, for over 17 years straight. They operate in over 50 countries as of right now, wanting to expand into more, and they implement programs tailored to the local need. This is one of the things that makes them stand out and so highly effective. Action Against Hunger is meeting you where you are at, working within the kind of culture and tailoring the experience and the help specifically to how you will best receive it and be able to be efficient with it. If you're going to give money towards this effort, I believe the best possible place you can do it is with Action Against Hunger. So, you've heard the need, you've heard the religious approach to it, you understand the God of the Bible and how how he feels about it, and I've given you what I believe to be the best possible representation of the secular ability to help this issue. I now just ask that you would, if you can, click the donate button to the right and give $1, $5, $10, $100, whatever you can. I'll be updating the totals in the pinned comment down below. A month from now, when we introduce a new one, I'll show the receipts of what I've given from the ad revenue. So again, please watch all the way through, comment, like, send, share, all of those things. Help us raise as much money as we can. Continue to give me ideas about issues and other charities you would like to see supported in the future. I'm so happy about this new endeavor of fundraising through Mindshift. I'm excited to be able to report a year from now all the good we've done in all of these different areas and all these different charities and all of the money that both through the donate button and the ad revenue we were able to give together. Please be a part of that with me, and until next time, keep giving. I wanted to personally thank my top tiers of support, my Iconoclast and Boris GVI, Joe, Kitboga, Perry, Rokkit, Shawn, and Tom, my Humanist heroes, James, Jarrod, Kristi, and Thronus, my Atheist advocates, Caleb, David, Jeff, Jeffrey, Lisa, Paul, Sparky, and Todd, as well as all of my secular scholar patrons. If you believe in the mission of this channel, or you just enjoy its content, please consider joining these fine people. Thanks, and have a great day.